The Eastern Pacific Ocean remains one of the most heavily exploited and strategically significant maritime drug corridors in the world. Transnational drug trafficking organizations, DTOs, primarily operating out of Central and South America, increasingly rely on maritime routes to move large volumes of cocaine, methamphetamines, heroin, and synthetic narcotics toward the United States and other consumer markets. Intelligence estimates indicate that between 70% and 80% of maritime cocaine smuggling attempts originating in South America pass through the Eastern Pacific Transit Zone, a vast area of open ocean that extends far beyond the reach of traditional coastal patrols. To counter this persistent and adaptive threat, the United States has implemented a multi-agency, forward-operating maritime interdiction strategy. This approach integrates the tactical capabilities of the U.S. Navy, the law enforcement authority of the U.S. Coast Guard, and the interagency coordination mechanisms of Homeland Security and U.S. Northern Command, U.S. NORTHCOM. At the center of this layered strategy is Operation Pacific Watch, a mission framework that places U.S. warships including Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers in patrol in high-threat smuggling lanes. These platforms serve as mobile command hubs, surveillance posts, and interdiction assets, equipped with advanced radar systems, embarked helicopters, and the capacity to host Coast Guard law enforcement detachments, LEDETs. On July 10, 2025, one such interdiction operation unfolded during a routine patrol by the USS Sampson, DDG-102, in the Eastern Pacific. The destroyer detected and intercepted a stateless go-fast vessel actively engaged in narcotics trafficking. Through a tightly coordinated response involving airborne surveillance, tactical disabling fire, and a Coast Guard-led boarding action, the U.S. forces successfully recovered 1.5 metric tons of cocaine, arrested 2 suspects, and scuttled the vessel, all without a single life lost or hostile engagement beyond non-lethal force. The estimated value of the narcotics interdicted exceeded 58 million USD at wholesale, with an even greater street value depending on distribution pathways. This case represents a clear demonstration of how U.S. maritime forces project legal authority, tactical capability, and deterrent presence well beyond the U.S. territorial sea. It underscores the importance of interoperability between defense and law enforcement agencies, and illustrates how precision coordination, governed by clearly defined rules of engagement and international maritime law, is reshaping the global fight against transnational organized crime on the high seas. As DTOs continue to innovate and exploit maritime routes, operations like this underscore the strategic necessity of maintaining a constant, credible, and legally empowered presence in international waters. At 637 hours local time, radar operators aboard the USS Sampson, DDG-102, identified a fast-moving surface contact approximately 380 nautical miles southwest of Acapulco, Mexico. The contact's location fell squarely within a well-documented high-traffic narco-smuggling corridor, routinely exploited by transnational criminal organizations, TCOs, for maritime transport of narcotics originating in Central and South America, en route to North American distribution hubs. The radar return displayed characteristics of a small, low-profile vessel traveling at high velocity, which immediately prompted increased scrutiny by the ship's Combat Information Center, CIC. Based on the behavioral profile and regional threat intelligence, the contact was assessed as anomalous and potentially hostile. Utilizing the ship's SP-1D phased array radar system, enhanced by integrated surface tracking and contact classification software, CIC operators conducted rapid analysis of the contact's heading, speed, and maneuvering profile. The observed behavior was consistent with known patterns associated with go-fast boatsa, term used within counter-narcotics operations to describe small, high-speed vessels favored by drug trafficking organizations, DTOs. These vessels are typically constructed with fiberglass hulls, powered by multiple outboard motors, and deliberately engineered with minimal radar cross-sections to reduce detectability. Their mission-specific design prioritizes speed, agility, and evasion, making them ideal for illicit transits across international waters while attempting to avoid interdiction. Within 20 seconds of initial radar contact, the vessel was flagged by CIC as a high-probability narcotics smuggling craft. The ship's readiness posture was immediately elevated from standard maritime patrol to intercept preparation status, and CIC began real-time data relay to the ship's command bridge. This ensured full situational awareness for the officer of the deck, OOD, and commanding officer, CO, as the vessel transitioned from passive detection to active engagement planning. Moments later, visual confirmation was obtained via the destroyer's forward-looking infrared FLIR sensor array. Infrared imagery revealed a series of dark, rectangular objects being deliberately jettisoned from the stern of the suspect vessel. The objects were consistent in size and shape, with compressed narcotics bales, commonly referred to as bricks of cocaine, and were non-buoyant and tightly wrapped in industry standard for maritime drug smuggling. This act of discarding contraband while underway is a well-documented evasive tactic used by DTOs to eliminate evidence prior to interdiction, thereby reducing the likelihood of prosecution. Given the alignment of behavioral, technical, and visual indicators, Commander Matthew Harding, the ship's commanding officer, ordered the initiation of formal intercept protocols. The vessel's lack of national flag, its evasive high-speed profile, and the active destruction of potential evidence met the threshold for classification as a stateless vessel under both international maritime law and U.S. legal doctrine. Specifically, the vessel was operating in violation of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, and fell under the enforcement authority of the Maritime Drug Law Enforcement Act, MDLEA. With sufficient indicators of hostile intent and criminal activity, the USS Sampson transitioned from a monitoring posture to tactical interdiction setting, the stage for the coordinated air-surface response that followed. Following confirmation of hostile activity and non-compliance from the suspect vessel, Commander Matthew Harding elevated the ship's readiness posture by ordering Condition 3. This alert status requires activation and staging of all shipboard weapon systems, aircraft assets, and boarding teams in preparation for rapid deployment. The intercept process began immediately with the launch of the Sampson's embarked MH-60R Seahawk helicopter, assigned to Helicopter Maritime Strike Squadron 49, HSM 49, and operating under the tactical call sign Reaper 1. The aircraft lifted off from the destroyer's aft flight deck at 639 hours, approximately 2 minutes after initial radar contact was established. The MH-60R was configured for interdiction with a complete sensor and targeting suite, including forward-looking infrared, FLIR, surface search radar, stabilized tracking pods, and 2 qualified door gunners operating 7.6 2mm M240 machine guns. The aircrew is joined by Law Enforcement Detachment 104, led at 104, a specialized U.S. Coast Guard team trained and certified in maritime interdiction, non-compliant boarding, evidence collection, and detainee handling under U.S. legal standards. Simultaneously, the Combat Information Center, CIC, aboard Sampson, initiated a live, continuous data feed to higher command authorities, including Pacific Watch Operational Control and U.S. Coast Guard District 11 Sector in Alameda, California. This coordination ensured that the operation would remain in compliance with the Maritime Drug Law Enforcement Act, MDLEA, and that appropriate legal procedures would govern the boarding, seizure, and arrest process. Because U.S. Navy vessels operating in international waters do not possess independent law enforcement authority under Title 10 of the U.S. Code, the presence of a Coast Guard leadette is essential to enable lawful arrest and seizure. The coordination between Navy and Coast Guard assets ensured both tactical superiority and legal legitimacy throughout the engagement. Within 90 seconds of the radar contact's classification as a probable narcotics vessel, a fully integrated air-surface interdiction operation was in motion focused on the interception of a confirmed stateless craft, actively engaged in contraband disposal while underway in a known international narcotics trafficking corridor. The MH-60R Seahawk helicopter deployed from the USS Sampson rapidly closed the distance to the suspect vessel, maintaining a tactical airspeed of approximately 120 knots while flying at a low operational altitude of 200 feet above sea level. This low-level flight profile was selected to provide optimal visual line of sight, as well as sensor fidelity for both onboard operators and the aircraft's targeting and surveillance systems. Upon achieving visual acquisition, the helicopter crew observed the vessel performing aggressive and erratic maneuvers in an apparent attempt to evade detection and pursuit. These maneuvers included sharp, unpredictable lateral course changes and rapid throttle adjustments, consistent with known cartel tactics referred to in maritime interdiction doctrine as zigzag evasion. This evasion technique is intended to complicate radar and infrared tracking, especially from overhead platforms such as helicopters or fixed-wing aircraft by presenting an inconsistent wake signature and avoiding sensor lock-on. The helicopter crew employed forward-looking infrared, FLIR, imaging systems to conduct thermal and optical surveillance of the vessel. The imaging confirmed that the vessel was actively engaged in contraband disposal, with multiple objects being ejected from the stern at rapid intervals. Both FLIR and visual confirmation verified the presence of 2 adult male individuals on board Doan, steering the vessel and the other repeatedly handling and discarding packaged material. The discarded items were uniform in size, shape, and packaging configuration, matching known physical characteristics of cartel-manufactured cocaine bricks. These bricks are typically encased in watertight plastic sheeting and synthetic fiber wrap, designed to resist seawater infiltration and increase surface flotation time if dumped prior to interdiction. Critically, the vessel lacked all forms of identifying registration. It displayed no national flag, carried no hull numbers or painted markings, and emitted no AIS, automatic identification system, or maritime radio signal. The crew made no attempt to respond to standard hailing protocols, neither via VHF maritime radio nor through visual cues such as flags or lights. These factors, combined with the evasive behavior and evidence disposal, classified the vessel as stateless under the legal definition provided by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Unclose. Under both international maritime law and U.S. maritime enforcement policy, stateless vessels operating in international waters and suspected of illicit activity are subject to boarding, search, seizure, and arrest by U.S. authorities. All imagery, tracking data, and onboard observations were relayed in real time back to the USS Sampson via an encrypted tactical data link for situational awareness and evidence continuity. Following confirmation of the vessel's status and unlawful activity, the helicopter transitioned to a persistent overwatch posture, maintaining safe distance while awaiting formal rules of engagement, ROE, authorization from the ship's commanding officer. No kinetic action was initiated until escalation criteria defined by Joint Navy Coast Guard operational procedures were met and legally validated. After confirming the suspect vessel's continued non-responsiveness to radio hails, absence of any identifying national markings, and ongoing efforts to jettison suspected narcotics, Commander Matthew Harding authorized a measured escalation of force in accordance with the U.S. Navy's non-lethal warning and disabling fire protocols. These protocols developed jointly by the U.S. Navy and U.S. Coast Guardari, rooted in dual legal authorities under Title 10, Defense Operations, and Title 14, Maritime Law Enforcement, of the United States Code. All applications of force under this framework are governed by a strict rules of engagement, ROE structure, which mandates that actions taken must be lawful, proportional, mission justified, and fully responsive to the threat environment. At approximately 647 hours, the first authorized use of force non-lethal warning fire was implemented. The MH-60R Seahawk aircrew received ROE clearance, and the portside door gunner discharged 7.62mm rounds from the M240 medium machine gun, deliberately aiming 10 meters off the starboard bow of the suspect vessel. This calculated burst served as an auditory and visual deterrent, clearly signaling that the vessel was under lawful interception by U.S. forces. Understanding ROE, this level of force is intended to compel immediate compliance without inflicting damage or risk of injury. Despite the warning, the suspect vessel made no effort to comply. It continued evasive navigation, executing abrupt directional changes, irregular throttle surges, and high-speed bursts all while actively discarding cargo overboard. This conduct constituted a willful defiance of lawful authority and significantly increased the risk to boarding personnel, while simultaneously threatening the destruction or loss of critical evidence. In response, Commander Harding issued a second directive, disabling fire aim for propulsion. The Seahawk repositioned to a tactically advantageous standoff position directly astern of the suspect craft. At approximately 649 hours, the door gunner delivered a controlled burst of precision fire targeting the vessel's dual outboard motors. The rounds struck with accuracy, resulting in the complete failure of both engines. The vessel immediately ceased forward motion and began drifting laterally under surface wave action. Post-engagement verification using FLIR, forward-looking infrared, systems and optical sensors confirmed that the vessel's hull remained structurally intact and that no personnel on board sustained injury as a result of the disabling action. With its propulsion system neutralized, the vessel was now immobilized, stateless, and non-compliant, but no longer posed an active threat to U.S. forces or maritime safety. The Seahawk maintained persistent overhead surveillance, ensuring airspace control and maritime domain awareness. With the situation stabilized, the interdiction operation transitioned seamlessly into its next phase, a visit, board, search, and seizure, VBSS, conducted by the embarked U.S. Coast Guard Law Enforcement Detachment, led at 104. Operating under full maritime law enforcement authority pursuant to the Maritime Drug Law Enforcement Act, MDLEA. The MH-60R Seahawk helicopter deployed from the USS Sampson, DDG-102, rapidly closed the distance to the radar-identified surface contact. The aircraft maintained a tactical airspeed of approximately 120 knots while operating at a low-level flight altitude of 200 feet above mean sea level. This flight profile was intentionally selected to optimize visual acquisition, minimize radar shadowing, and ensure maximum sensor resolution from the aircraft's integrated surveillance and targeting suite. Upon achieving line-of-sight visual contact, The flight crew observed the suspect vessel engaging in aggressive and non-linear maneuvering, clearly designed to complicate tracking and avoid interception. The suspect vessel's behavior included sharp lateral course deviations, abrupt throttle modulation, and unpredictable wake signatures collectively recognized in maritime interdiction as zigzag evasion. This defensive tactic is commonly employed by narcotics smugglers attempting to break radar lock or defeat FLIR tracking systems. Its use indicated a high probability that the vessel's operators were trained in evasive smuggling techniques used by transnational criminal networks operating throughout the Eastern Pacific Transit Zone. The helicopter crew activated the onboard forward-looking infrared FLIR system and conducted both thermal and electro-optical surveillance. The imaging confirmed the vessel was actively engaged in contraband disposal. Infrared feeds and visible spectrum video documented multiple packages being thrown overboard at regular intervals. 2 adult male individuals were clearly identified, one at the helm, piloting the vessel, and the other manually discarding materials from the stern under high-speed conditions. The ejected items were uniform in size, weight, and packaging, matching the known characteristics of cartel-produced cocaine, brick specifically. Tightly compressed bundles encased in watertight plastic, synthetic wrap, and often dual-layered insulation. These measures are designed to delay sinking, allowing retrieval by alternate vessels if primary interdiction is successful. This packaging is also optimized to minimize odor signatures for drug-sniffing canines and chemical detection methods at ports of entry. Equally significant was the vessel's complete absence of identifying features. It displayed no national flag, bore no hull numbers or paint markings, and emitted no AIS, automatic identification system, signature, which is mandated under international maritime regulations for vessels operating beyond territorial seas. Furthermore, the crew made no response to repeated hailing attempts, issued both via VHF maritime radio and via visual signals from the aircraft. This failure to communicate constituted a clear refusal to comply with lawful maritime boarding procedures. These combined indicators evasive maneuvers, active evidence disposal, and absence of national documentations satisfied the legal criteria for designating the vessel as stateless under Article 110 of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. 1 close. According to international and U.S. maritime enforcement law, stateless vessels operating in international waters suspected of trafficking narcotics are subject to immediate boarding, search, seizure, and detention by U.S. authorities, including those acting under Title 14 Coast Guard authority when deployed aboard Navy platforms. All visual evidence, telemetry data, imagery, and contact logs were relayed in real time to the USS Sampson's Combat Information Center, CIC, via a secure encrypted tactical data link. This ensured a verifiable record of situational awareness and met the evidentiary standards required for judicial processing. Upon receiving final confirmation from CIC that the vessel met the criteria for further interdiction, the helicopter assumed a persistent overwatch posture, orbiting the area while maintaining target surveillance. The aircrew then awaited formal Rules of Engagement, ROE, authorization from the Sampson's commanding officer. No kinetic or coercive measures were initiated until ROE thresholds established by Joint Navy Coast Guard operational directives were legally validated and confirmed in compliance with U.S. policy and applicable international law. During the boarding and arrest phase, visual observation and FLIR confirmation revealed multiple floating narcotics bales drifting in open water within a 150-meter radius of the disabled Go-Fast vessel. These bales had been jettisoned during the pursuit in an attempt to destroy or distance evidence from the suspects. Immediately following the suspect's secure transfer to custody, the USS Sampson's RHIB crews initiated a recovery operation, using grappling hooks, netting, and flotation marker buoys to locate, secure, and retrieve the floating contraband under direct Coast Guard supervision. Each bale recovered was subjected to evidentiary handling protocols. Packages were first tagged with serialized evidence markers, photographed in situ, and their precise GPS coordinates logged using handheld tracking devices to maintain strict chain of custody compliance. The surface conditions, time of recovery, and visual bale characteristics were also documented for each item. A total of 47 tightly wrapped rectangular bales were successfully recovered. Each package matched the standard size, color, and waterproof wrapping, consistent with cocaine shipments associated with known Central and South American drug trafficking organizations. Estimated individual weight per bale ranged between 33 and 36 kilograms, consistent with prior interdiction recoveries in the region. To confirm substance identity, a portable narcotics identification kit was employed on the RHIB deck. Using a sterile field blade, a small cross-sectional sample was extracted from one representative bale. The sample was immediately tested using a Scott reagent test, a field-standard colorimetric assay for cocaine hydrochloride detection. The test strip turned bright blue within seconds, positively identifying the substance as high-purity cocaine hydrochloride. The total confirmed weight of the narcotics seized was calculated at approximately 439 pounds, 560 kilograms. The estimated wholesale value at origin was placed at 58 million USD, while projected retail street value contingent on route, purity, dilution, and market conditions could exceed 150 million USD. This figure represents a significant financial disruption to cartel logistics and distribution networks. All recovered contraband was securely transported to the USS Sampson's evidence lockers, where it was stored under temperature-controlled conditions in accordance with Coast Guard evidence retention policy. Every item was dual-logged by both Navy and Coast Guard personnel and remained under continuous oversight to maintain legal admissibility for federal prosecution. Following the successful completion of the contraband seizure and suspect apprehension phases, the intercepted vessel, classified as a go-fast type commonly used by maritime narcotics traffickers, was formally assessed by the boarding team and declared unseaworthy. The vessel's fiberglass hull exhibited significant structural compromise, including visible cracking along the keel, likely resulting from stress incurred during high-speed maneuvers and the impact of disabling fire. Both outboard engines were inoperable, and further inspection confirmed the absence of essential maritime safety systems: no functioning bilge pump, no navigation lights, no anchoring mechanism, and no onboard emergency flotation equipment. A disabled and adrift vessel in open waters presents a substantial navigation hazard, particularly in heavily transited regions of international sea lanes. In this condition, the Go Fast posed a risk to both civilian shipping traffic and U.S. naval operations. Based on this risk, and in accordance with established Coast Guard maritime disposal protocols, the law enforcement detachment led an officer aboard recommended controlled destruction of the vessel to safely eliminate the threat. At approximately 945 hours, a RHIB launched from the USS Sampson returned to the immobilized Go Fast, carrying a portable low-yield hull-breaching demolition charge. The device was designed to produce localized structural failure rather than explosive fragmentation, minimizing risk to the surrounding environment and personnel. It was carefully positioned along the vessel's stern to ensure effective water ingress upon detonation. At 1,012 hours, following verification from the ship's command bridge and final safety checks, the detonation was authorized. A subdued implosion occurred, breaching the hull cleanly. The vessel began to flood immediately and was fully submerged within 3 minutes. A follow-up environmental assessment was conducted by the boarding team to ensure there were no hazardous material leaks, fuel slicks, or floating debris fields. The operation concluded with no measurable ecological damage, and the site was cleared for continued naval operations. This operation was conducted under the umbrella of Pacific Watch, a high-priority joint maritime security initiative coordinated by U.S. Northern Command, U.S. NORTHCOM. The mission framework is designed to detect, deter, and dismantle transnational maritime threats, particularly narcotics smuggling networks that operate across vast expanses of international waters. Execution of the mission involved close operational coordination between multiple agencies, principally the U.S. Coast Guard Pacific Area Command, which holds primary authority for maritime law enforcement and safety, and the U.S. Navy's Third Fleet, which supplies the forward-deployed naval assets, command structure, and interoperability framework required for sustained high-seas interdiction. The platform assigned for this operation, the USS Sampson, DDG-102, though originally configured for ballistic missile defense and anti-submarine warfare, was employed in a maritime interdiction role due to its multi-mission capabilities. The destroyer's advanced Spy-1D radar array, FLIR-equipped surveillance systems, aviation assets, including the MH-60R Seahawk, and its ability to accommodate Coast Guard law enforcement detachments let it make it particularly effective for complex interdiction operations that span the domains of national defense and federal law enforcement. This deployment reflects the U.S. Navy's evolving multi-mission doctrine, under which Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers can flexibly transition between conventional warfighting missions and emergent roles such as counter-narcotics operations, humanitarian response, and freedom of navigation patrols. Under Title 14 of the United States Code, the U.S. Coast Guard is the lead federal agency with the authority to execute arrests, seizures, and searches at sea, including on stateless vessels operating in international waters. Once a vessel meets the legal criteria for statelessness, i.e., no flag, no nationality claim, and no response to lawful hail-sail, all subsequent law enforcement actions are conducted under Coast Guard jurisdiction, regardless of whether they physically occur aboard a Navy ship. In this operation, That meant Lead It 104 was the lead element for suspect apprehension, rights advisement, evidence handling, and initiation of prosecutorial procedures, all while embarked aboard a warship operating under Navy command. In accordance with interagency evidence protocols and intelligence security standards, all surveillance data collected during the operation, including radar plots, AIS logs, GPS coordinates, FLIR, forward-looking infrared, video, and weapon system telemetry was securely archived and transmitted through encrypted channels to both Coast Guard District 11 Command in Alameda, California, and the Joint Interagency Task Force South, JIAT F South, headquartered in Key West, Florida. These two entities are responsible for conducting post-operation analysis, coordinating with the U.S. Department of Justice for prosecution, and integrating the gathered intelligence into ongoing assessments of cartel movement patterns, maritime smuggling trends, and international criminal networks. The July 10, 2025 interdiction operation stands as a definitive case study in modern U.S. maritime enforcement strategy. Conducted without the use of missiles, and with zero casualties sustained by either U.S. forces or suspects, the operation demonstrated the effectiveness of integrated naval law enforcement collaboration. Through the coordinated efforts of the U.S. Navy and U.S. Coast Guard, the mission successfully resulted in the removal of 1.5 metric tons of cocaine from the narcotics supply chain and the neutralization of a cartel-operated smuggling vessel operating in international waters, hundreds of miles from U.S. territory. The outcome illustrates the growing role of multi-mission platforms in non-traditional combat roles, such as maritime law enforcement, surveillance, and interdiction. Operations of this nature have become a cornerstone of the United States deterrence-based doctrine, demonstrating not only reach and readiness, but also a legal framework for engagement far beyond the nation's coastline. By projecting force and legal authority 380 nautical miles offshore, the U.S. communicates an unambiguous message to transnational criminal organizations. No maritime corridor is beyond detection, no smuggling route is immune to interdiction, and no vessel is too remote to fall outside the scope of U.S. jurisdiction. These actions are not only a show of strength, they represent the certainty of consequence. That certainty, more than force alone, serves as a primary mechanism of deterrence. Each successful interdiction has an effect well beyond the seized cargo. It imposes strategic strain on the drug trafficking organizations, DTOs, that depend on high-volume maritime shipments and tightly synchronized logistics. These criminal networks operate based on risk-to-reward calculations, balancing payload size, probability of detection, and interdiction severity. When military-grade surveillance, interagency coordination, and seamless legal transition become routine in international waters, the operational cost of trafficking rises. Routes must be abandoned. Schedules must be revised. Smuggling techniques must evolve. Ultimately, the consistency of enforcement undermines the predictability DTOs rely upon, and profit margins begin to erode. The deployment of multi-mission destroyers such as the USS Sampson in maritime interdiction roles highlights a key evolution in U.S. naval doctrine. No longer confined to missile defense or blue water warfighting roles, platforms like Sampson, when paired with Coast Guard law enforcement detachments, LEDITs, form a hybrid capability combining persistent military presence with the ability to legally enforce U.S. and international law. This fusion of authorities' military intelligence, civilian jurisdiction, and global reach represents an operational gold standard for counter-narcotics efforts at sea. It reflects a strategic pivot toward agility, legality, and layered maritime defense. In an era defined by asymmetric and transnational threats, the ability to detect, intercept, and legally dismantle criminal operations before they reach U.S. shores is not only a tactical necessity, it is a matter of national strategy and foresight. As cartels adapt and maritime smuggling tactics evolve, the continued presence of flexible, joint operating U.S. forces at sea remains one of the most powerful deterrents in the global fight against narcotics trafficking.